The hearing room in Congress fell completely still the moment Mark Levin, the towering conservative radio legend renowned for his thunderous delivery and encyclopedic command of the Constitution, leaned forward into his microphone. Behind the familiar thick-rimmed glasses, his eyes narrowed and fixed directly on Representative Jasmine Crockett, seated across the long committee table. What happened in the 30 seconds that followed would explode across the internet and become one of the most watched political exchanges of the entire year, leaving millions asking whether the man conservatives called the Great One had just been decisively outclassed by a first-term congresswoman from Texas. Before we watch the moment itself, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because what you're about to witness is raw, unfiltered political combat at its absolute finest. This was never going to be just another routine oversight hearing. It was the clash of two razor-sharp legal minds, one forged in decades of broadcast dominance, the other tempered in the high-stakes crucible of real Texas courtrooms, and the collision would damage one reputation beyond repair while instantly elevating another. For weeks the anticipation had been building. Mark Levin, the undisputed heavyweight champion of conservative talk radio, had accepted an invitation to testify before the House Judiciary Committee on the topics of constitutional interpretation and the limits of executive power. For more than 30 years Levin had ruled the airwaves with a commanding baritone, airtight arguments, and a gift for intellectually eviscerating anyone who dared cross him. His best-selling books, classics like Liberty and Tyranny and American Marxism, had shaped conservative thought, influenced public debate, and even found their way into Supreme Court briefs. In the minds of millions, when Levin spoke about the Constitution, the conversation was over. Seated opposite him was Representative Jasmine Crockett, the freshly elected Democrat from Texas's 30th District. On paper she looked like the underdog, young, only months into her first term, and lacking the decades of national media prominence that Levin carried like body armor. Yet anyone who had followed her career knew better. Beneath the calm exterior burned the battle-tested mind of a former public defender and civil rights attorney who had spent years in courtrooms where a single misstated rule could send an innocent person to prison for life. Everyone assumed the script was already written. Levin would quote the Federalist Papers from memory, Republicans would lob softball questions, Democrats would offer mild pushback, and the Great One would leave with another highlight reel for his show. Then Jasmine Crockett reached forward, adjusted her microphone, locked eyes with him, and the temperature in the room changed in an instant. "Mr. Levin," she began, her voice steady, almost conversational, "before we get into substance, I just want to make sure the record is clear about credentials. You have written extensively, books, articles, daily broadcasts, on constitutional law." "That's correct, yes." Levin offered the half-smirk millions of listeners knew as the prelude to a demolition. He had no idea he had just stepped onto a minefield that had been meticulously mapped for weeks. To grasp why this exchange hit like a freight train, you have to understand exactly who these two people were. Mark Levin was not just another pundit. To movement conservatives he was royalty, Temple Law 80, veteran of the Reagan Justice Department, author of 7 New York Times bestsellers, and the nightly voice that shaped how tens of millions understood the founding documents. His trademark move was to savage the legal credentials of his ideological opponents, sneering that certain law schools were degree mills, that some graduates had affirmative action law degrees, and that most Democrats couldn't pass a first-year constitutional law exam if the fate of the republic depended on it. Jasmine Crockett, by contrast, had spent the previous decade as a public defender and civil rights litigator in Texas courtrooms. University of Houston Law Center graduate, licensed and in good standing with the State Bar of Texas, hundreds of cases under her belt, cases where real human liberty hung on every objection, every citation, every closing argument. For weeks leading up to the hearing her staff had compiled an exhaustive dossier, clips of Levin mocking diversity hire lawyers, transcripts of him mangling basic doctrine, screenshots of tweets questioning whether certain law schools even belonged in the conversation. She knew his tells, his favorite rhetorical flourishes, and, most importantly, where the gaps in his working legal knowledge had grown over 4 decades away from actual courtrooms. The gallery was packed. C-SPAN cameras rolled. Conservative influencers in the front row leaned forward expecting another "Levin owns the libs" reel. Progressive reporters quietly hoped for any moment they could clip. Behind Levin sat 2 staffers clutching thick binders stuffed with founding-era quotes. Behind Crockett sat one aide holding nothing but an iPad. She didn't need the binders. The early minutes played out exactly as scripted. Republican members teed up friendly questions. Levin answered with fluid references to Madison, Hamilton, and the original public meaning of the Commerce Clause. He was in his element, performing for the cameras the same way he performed 3 hours a night, 5 nights a week. Then the chair recognized Ms. Crockett of Texas. She began politely, almost deferentially. Mr. Levin, you've been very vocal over the years about the declining quality of American legal education. In fact, just last month on your program you said, and I want to get the quote exactly right, half these Democrats couldn't pass a first-year constitutional law exam if their lives depended on it. You stand by that statement? Levin adjusted his glasses, the universal sign he was loading the cannons. I say a lot of things on my program, Congresswoman, but yes, I believe many elected officials today have only a passing acquaintance with the actual Constitution. I see, she replied, flipping calmly through a thin stack of highlighted transcripts. You've also repeatedly described certain law schools as degree mills that hand out participation trophies instead of real legal training. That's still your view? The room grew quieter. A few Republican members shifted in their seats. Levin doubled down, voice rising with familiar indignation. When law schools prioritize DEI quotas over actual scholarship, when their graduates can't name a single holding from a major constitutional case, yes, that's a participation trophy, not an education. A low ripple of reaction crossed the Democratic side. Interesting, Crockett continued, unruffled. So you believe you are better qualified than state bar associations to determine who does and does not understand the law? Levin leaned back, smug. Passing the bar is a floor, Congresswoman, not a ceiling. I've forgotten more constitutional law than most practicing lawyers ever knew. That was the exact moment she pounced. She reached down, pulled out a thick manila folder, and opened it deliberately so every C-SPAN camera caught the depth of the material inside. Mr. Levin, let's test that. You attended Temple University Beasley School of Law, class of 1980, correct? Correct. You clerked, you worked in the Reagan administration, you were in private practice for several years. That's right. I see. When, sir, was the last time you actually argued a motion in open court, not talked about one on the radio, not wrote about one in a book, but stood at a podium before a judge and fought for a client's liberty? The room went dead silent. Levin's jaw tightened. My experience in the Reagan administration. I didn't ask about political appointments, Mr. Levin, she cut in smoothly. I asked when you last filed a brief on a deadline because your client's freedom depended on it. When you last stood in a courtroom where one procedural mistake could cost an innocent person decades of their life. Levin's temper flared, the same temper his audience loved when it was aimed at liberals. This is absurd. My credentials speak for themselves. I've written 7 New York Times bestsellers. Books, she interrupted again, timing perfect. You've written books. I've tried felony cases. You analyze law from a studio with commercial breaks. I've practiced it under oath with lives on the line. So please, tell the committee, do you truly believe decades of radio commentary make you more qualified than attorneys who are in court every single week? His face began to redden. She was just warming up. Speaking of your record, Mr. Levin, January 15th of this year you told your audience that Marbury versus Madison was fundamentally about judicial restraint. Would you like to correct the record now, or should I explain to the committee why that case actually established judicial review? Gasps from the legal staffers in the gallery. First-year law students were tweeting in real time. Levin tried to wave it away. That was taken out of. February 22nd, she pressed on without pause, you claimed the Equal Protection Clause was never intended to apply to voting rights. Should I read the 1866 Congressional Globe into the record, or will you concede that's incorrect? Democrats were no longer hiding smiles. March 10th you said there is no constitutional basis for agency regulation. Have you ever actually read Chevron v. NRDC, or would you like me to quote the holding? Each question landed like a jab followed immediately by a cross. These weren't debatable interpretations, these were flat-out mistakes no active attorney would ever make. Levin's voice rose to the familiar shout. This is a planned ambush. No, sir, she replied, calm as ever. You've spent years questioning whether lawyers, especially women of color, actually earned their degrees. You've called us diversity hires. Today I'm simply asking you to demonstrate the superior knowledge you claim. Unless, of course, you can't. Dead silence. She gave him one beat, then went for the finish. Let's try something any first-year could answer. Can you explain the difference between a motion in limine and a motion for summary judgment? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. What's the two-pronged test for ineffective assistance of counsel under Strickland v. Washington? Still nothing. You mock participation trophy lawyers, Mr. Levin. Yet your entire media empire has been built on a law license you haven't used in a courtroom since the Reagan administration. I've spent the last decade keeping innocent people out of prison. So tell me, who's really holding the participation trophy? The dam broke. Democratic members erupted in applause before the chair could even reach the gavel. Cameras caught Republican staffers staring at the floor. Crockett wasn't done. She held up one final document, her Texas bar card, still active, still in good standing. This is my law license, Mr. Levin. This stack beside it. Case files. Real clients. Real wins. Real lives changed. Not commentary. Not theater. Law. Then, almost gently, one last chance. Anyone else could answer this. Explain the doctrine of selective incorporation and how the Bill of Rights applies to the states through the 14th Amendment. Levin fumbled for words, voice stripped of its usual thunder. The Bill of Rights, through the 14th. She waited 3 full seconds, an eternity on live television, then quietly filled the silence herself, reciting the doctrine with the ease of someone who had taught it to junior associates the week before. She concluded, voice steady and resonant. The difference between us, Mr. Levin, isn't Temple versus Houston, isn't black versus white, isn't woman versus man. The difference is I'm still a lawyer. You're a former lawyer who became a talk show host and never looked back, except to question the credentials of people still doing the work. She gathered her papers with the calm finality of a trial attorney resting her case. No further questions, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Levin's qualifications to lecture the nation on constitutional law have been established for the record. The gavel fell, but everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed history. Mark Levin, the man who had built an empire telling America who did and did not understand the Constitution, sat motionless, face flushed crimson, utterly exposed. As the recess was called, Jasmine Crockett stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked past his table. She paused just long enough for the microphones to catch one final line. I'll be listening to your show tonight, Mr. Levin. Curious to see how you spin this, though after today, I'm not sure you know what spin means in a legal sense either. He had no reply. Within minutes the clip was everywhere. #Crockett destroys Levin trended #1 worldwide. Progressive outlets called it the most satisfying takedown in congressional history. Even some conservative commentators quietly admitted Levin had walked into a buzzsaw. That night his radio show drew record audience, for all the wrong reasons. Instead of contrition, he raged for an hour about left-wing ambushes, and never once addressed the substantive legal errors Crockett had laid bare. Callers, his own loyal listeners, began pushing back live on air. One lifelong fan from Dallas told him, "Mark, she wiped the floor with you on basic con law. How can you still claim she doesn't know what she's talking about?" He cut to commercial and never took another call that night. In the weeks that followed, old clips resurfaced, Levin misstating Marbury, bungling the Commerce Clause, confusing standing with ripeness. Law professors who had bitten their tongues for years finally spoke out. Federalist Society listservs lit up with private admissions that, "We always knew he was more entertainer than scholar." Advertisers quietly pulled spots. Stations in major markets began moving his show out of drive time. Book sales collapsed. Speaking gigs were canceled. 3 months later Westwood One quietly reformatted the program from constitutional commentary to general conservative talk. Industry sources said the decision came after multiple sponsors threatened to walk. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, became a national phenomenon overnight. Her follower count exploded. Law schools invited her to lecture. Publishers called about book deals. The University of Houston Law Center, once dismissed by Levin as second tier, saw applications jump 30% in a single cycle. She never gloated. In every interview she repeated the same calm message: this wasn't personal. It was about defending every public defender, every civil rights attorney, every graduate of a non-T14 school who had ever been told their credentials weren't good enough by someone who hadn't set foot in a courtroom since the 1980s. 5 years later, students in constitutional law classes across America still watch the Crockett-Levin exchange as a masterclass in preparation, precision, and the difference between performing law and practicing it. Law schools added it to trial advocacy curricula. The phrase, pulling a Crockett, entered political lexicon, meaning to dismantle an overconfident opponent with quiet, relentless competence. Mark Levin's radio show was eventually cancelled. His audience scattered. He became a cautionary tale in journalism textbooks, the danger of letting decades-old credentials calcify into unearned authority. Jasmine Crockett rose to become one of the most respected legal minds in Congress, later arguing, and winning, a major voting rights case before the Supreme Court itself. And an entire generation of young lawyers, especially women and lawyers of color, learned the lesson she taught that day. True expertise isn't declared from a studio microphone. It's proven, line by line, citation by citation, in the arena where real lives are on the line. That is the day the country finally saw the difference between talking about the law and actually knowing it.